Madison Hart slammed her resignation letter on the conference table, then stopped, picked it up, crumpled it, and threw it straight into the trash. Because walking away wasn't the plan anymore. He was coming to the lake house. Lucas Grant, her ex, her mistake, and she was not showing up alone. She needed someone real, someone steady, someone who wouldn't flinch. She needed Ethan Cole. The problem: what she was about to ask him would change everything between them, and neither one of them was ready for what came next. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe and follow along. This one's going to hit hard. Ethan Cole had learned one thing in 30 years of living: the quieter your life, the better your chances of surviving it. He wasn't bitter about that. Not anymore. He'd made his peace with the smallness of things, the routine, the predictability, the steady rhythm of a Tuesday morning that looked exactly like every Monday before it. Wake up at 5:15, start the coffee, check on Sophie, pack her lunch, drop her at school, drive to the job site, work until his hands ached, pick her up, make dinner, read to her until she fell asleep, then sit alone in the kitchen and drink the last of the coffee gone cold, staring at nothing in particular. That was life, his life, and it was enough. Sophie was 7. She had her mother's eyes and his stubborn jaw, and she laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them. She was the best thing he'd ever done, and he knew it every single day, even on the days it cost him everything to keep going. Her mother, Diane, had left 3 years ago. Not dramatically, no screaming, no thrown dishes. Just a Tuesday afternoon when Sophie was at preschool, and Ethan came home to a note on the kitchen counter that said, I love you both, but I can't stay. He'd read it 4 times before he understood what it meant. Then he'd folded it, put it in the kitchen drawer with the takeout menus, and never looked at it again. He didn't hate Diane. He understood her. In the way you understand a storm, you can't argue with it. You can only get out of the way and assess the damage afterward. The damage was manageable. He was managing it. Work helped. The job site had a clarity to it: problems you could diagnose, solutions you could execute, results you could measure. Ethan was good at electricity. He understood circuits. He understood that every system has a point where it either holds the load or breaks under it, and he'd spent years learning how to keep things from breaking. He'd worked at Hart Construction and Development for 4 years, which meant he'd worked for Madison Hart for 4 years, which was its own particular kind of education. Madison Hart was not an easy person to work for. She was 32, sharp as a wire splice, and ran her family's development company with the kind of focused intensity that made grown men nervous and junior architects rethink their careers. She didn't micromanage. She didn't need to. She had a way of asking one question that made you realize you hadn't thought something through clearly enough, and then she'd wait, perfectly still, while you caught up to her. Ethan had figured out early on that the way to handle Madison Hart was to be direct, competent, and completely unbothered by her. She respected people who didn't flinch. She had no patience for performance, no interest in flattery, and absolutely no time for people who needed hand-holding. So naturally, they got along. Not easily, not immediately, but genuinely, over time. The way two people who are both too practical for nonsense eventually find each other useful. She'd started coming to him with problems that had nothing to do with electrical systems, not because she needed his expertise, but because she needed someone who'd give her a straight answer without trying to manage her reaction to it. Should we push the Lakeview project deadline? She'd ask, leaning against the doorframe of the supply room while he inventoried cable runs. Depends on whether you want it done right or done fast, he'd say, not looking up. Both. Pick one. She'd picked right both times, and the projects had come in better for it. They weren't friends, exactly, but they were something harder to name, but more solid than most things Ethan had in his life outside of Sophie. He trusted her, she trusted him back, and in Ethan's experience, that was rarer and more valuable than most people understood. He was in the middle of replacing a faulty breaker panel in the unit above the hardware store when his phone buzzed. "Can you stop by tonight? It's important." It was from Madison. No greeting, no context, no explanation. Classic. He sent back, "Sophie's with me." 3 seconds later, "That's fine. Bring her." He frowned at the screen. Madison had met Sophie exactly twice, once at the company summer cookout, and once Sophie had shown up unexpectedly at a job site because her after-school pickup had fallen through. Both times, Madison had handled it with the same brisk efficiency she applied to everything else, producing a granola bar from somewhere and keeping Sophie occupied with a tablet while Ethan finished up. It wasn't warmth, exactly, but it wasn't coldness either. He finished the breaker panel, cleaned up the site, and drove to pick up Sophie from the neighbor's house where she'd gone after school. She climbed into the truck with her backpack hanging off one shoulder and her sneakers untied, and she launched immediately into a detailed account of a disagreement she'd had with her best friend. Akan Kreith about, but the correct way to make a peanut butter sandwich. "She puts the peanut butter on both pieces," Sophie said, with the gravity of someone reporting a war crime. "Both, Dad. Both pieces." "That's a lot of peanut butter," Ethan agreed. "It's too much peanut butter. And then, when you press them together, it squishes out the sides. A real problem." I told her. She didn't care. Sophie looked out the window, apparently accepting the injustice of the world. "Where are we going?" "This isn't home. We're stopping by my boss's house." "The scary lady." "She's not scary." Sophie considered this. "She looks at people like she's calculating something." "She is calculating something. That's her job." "She calculated me that one time at the barbecue. It was intense." Ethan pulled up in front of Madison's building, a clean, modern townhouse near the edge of the Lake District. The kind of place that looked put together without trying too hard, and cut the engine. "She likes you," he said. "How do you know?" "She gave you a granola bar." Sophie nodded slowly. "True, she didn't have to do that." Madison answered the door in jeans and a gray pullover, her dark hair down instead of in its usual clean knot at the back of her neck. She looked different like this, quieter. Like a version of herself she didn't usually let people see. She looked at Sophie first. "Hi." Sophie looked up at her with the direct, evaluating stare of a 7-year-old. "Hi. My dad says you're not scary." "A beat. He's being generous." Sophie seemed to accept this as honest and stepped inside without being invited. Madison watched her go, and something almost like amusement crossed her face before she looked at Ethan. "Thanks for coming," she said, just like that, like it cost her nothing, though he knew from 4 years of working with her that asking for things didn't come easily to Madison Hart. "You said it was important," he said. "I don't usually question that. Come in." The inside of her place was exactly what he'd expected: clean, ordered, no clutter, but with small signs of actual life if you looked for them. A stack of books on the coffee table, a half-finished cup of tea going cold on the kitchen counter, running shoes by the door that showed real mileage. Sophie had already found a spot on the carpet and was investigating a bowl of smooth river stones arranged near the fireplace, picking them up and examining each one with scientific thoroughness. Madison moved to the kitchen. "Coffee?" "Sure." She poured without fuss, handed him a mug, and stood on the other side of the counter. She wrapped both hands around her own mug and looked at him. He'd seen that look before. It was the look she got when she was about to say something she'd been rehearsing. "I need a favor," she said. "Okay." She paused, adjusted. "A significant favor." "How significant?" She set her mug down. "My family does a lake house weekend every year, first weekend of December. Parents, my brother and his wife, a few cousins, the whole thing. I've been going every year for the past decade." A pause. "Lucas will be there." Ethan was quiet for a moment. He knew the name. He'd only heard it in pieces, the way you learn things about someone you work closely with, not through conversation, but through context. The look on her face the day she'd come to work, hollow-eyed after what he'd assumed was a bad weekend. The way she'd snapped once, when someone on a call had said something he couldn't hear, and the brittleness underneath the snap, that he'd pretended not to notice. Lucas Grant, the ex, apparently still circling. He'll be there, Ethan said, and my family already knew we broke up, Madison said. But they don't know why, and she stopped. Pressed her lips together. They feel sorry for me, Ethan. My mother called me twice last week to check on me. My brother texted to say I could talk to him anytime. My cousin sent a care package with tea and a book about moving on. Her jaw set. I am not going to that house alone and letting everyone look at me like I'm recovering from something. You are recovering from something. I don't need to broadcast it. He watched her. She was rigid with it, the pride, the refusal, the fierce privacy that was so central to who she was. He understood it completely. He'd felt it himself in the weeks after Diane left, when well-meaning people kept offering condolences like he was grieving instead of just adjusting. You want someone to go with you, he said. I want someone to go with me, she confirmed. As someone I'm seeing. Silence. From the carpet. Sophie held up a smooth black stone and announced, "This one's a basalt, I think. We learned about rocks." Neither of them responded immediately. Ethan looked at Madison. You want me to pretend to be your boyfriend? For one weekend, she said it evenly, like it was a project proposal. 3 days. My family is warm and not particularly suspicious. Lucas she paused. He knows how to get to me. He always has. I need someone who won't. Who won't flinch, Ethan said. She looked at him directly for the first time since she'd opened the door. Yes. He should have said no. He knew that. He knew it the way you know, a circuit's at capacity. Before it trips, you can feel the load before the break. This was a bad idea dressed up in reasonable language. 1 weekend of lying. With his daughter's schedule to manage. With Madison Hart, who didn't do anything halfway. With a lake house full of family, who would be paying very close attention. He should have said no. Instead, he heard himself say, "What about Sophie?" Madison blinked. Then, she can come. She has school Monday. We'll leave Sunday evening. She gets carsick on winding roads. I'll drive. My car's smoother. He looked at her. She was prepared. She'd thought about this already. She'd thought about Sophie. You thought about bringing Sophie, he said. I thought about everything. A pause. I need you, Ethan. And I don't say that often. You know, I don't say it often. He did know that. He'd heard her say a lot of things in 4 years. I need something wasn't in her regular vocabulary. He looked over at Sophie, who had now arranged 6 river stones in a row by size and was squinting at the 7th. He looked back at Madison. 1 weekend, he said. 1 weekend. No dramatics. None. I'm not wearing a suit. Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, but close to the bones of one. I wouldn't ask you to. And if this gets complicated. It won't, she said, and she believed it. He could hear that she believed it completely. He didn't believe it, but he'd learned a long time ago that some mistakes are worth making, even when you see them coming. Sometimes rarely. Sometimes. But sometimes what looks like a mistake from the outside turns out to be something else entirely on the other end of it. All right, he said. All right, she echoed. And for just a moment, the rigidness in her shoulders dropped. Not much, but enough. Sophie looked up from her stones. Are we done? I'm hungry. Yeah, Bug, Ethan said. We're done. Madison moved toward the kitchen. I have leftover pasta, if she wants it. She wants it, Sophie said, already getting up. Ethan watched Madison warm the pasta, watched Sophie climb onto a kitchen stool, and immediately start asking questions about the Riverstones and where each one came from. Watched Madison answer each one with the same clean precision. She applied to everything and felt something shift, quietly, in the space behind his ribs. He ignored it. He was good at ignoring things. He'd had years of practice. They left for the lake house on a Friday morning, 2 weeks later. What Ethan had not accounted for, what neither of them had fully processed in the clean, Logical conversation at Madison's kitchen counter was the weather. The storm came in from the northwest overnight, and by the time Ethan had Sophie buckled in the back seat of Madison's car at 6:45 in the morning, the sky to the north was the color of a bruise. Madison was checking road conditions on her phone, her expression doing the thing it did when she was recalculating a situation she didn't fully control. "Roads are clear south of the valley," she said. "What about north?" "We'll see." They didn't see until they were 2 hours into the drive, and the temperature had dropped 9 degrees, and the rain had turned to something harder. Sophie had fallen asleep in the back seat, with her head against the window. Madison drove with both hands on the wheel, steady and focused. Then the highway alert appeared on her display. "Road closure ahead, icy conditions, alternate route required." Madison said a word under her breath that she immediately glanced into the back seat to make sure Sophie hadn't heard. Sophie was deeply asleep. "Alternate route," Ethan said. Adds 40 minutes. "And there's a guest lodge about 12 miles off the highway if conditions worsen. We should stop. Pull up the lodge." She handed him her phone. He found it. Pinewood Ridge Lodge. Cabins and suites. Currently at capacity, 1 suite remaining. He looked at her. She looked at the road. "1 room," he said. "I see that." "Madison." "I see it." A pause. "The alternative is driving through an ice storm with a 7-year-old in the back seat." He looked out at the road ahead, where the freezing rain was now catching the headlights and throwing it back in sheets. "We stop," he said. "We stop," she agreed. And just like that, 12 miles off the highway, in a lodge with 1 room remaining, in the middle of a storm that hadn't been in any of her careful plans, the simple favor started to become something else entirely. Neither of them said it out loud. But the space between them in that car, quiet and warm while the ice came down outside, said enough. The storm was just the beginning. Pinewood Ridge Lodge had exactly 1 suite left. At the front desk, quiescence, and the woman at the front desk said it with the particular cheerfulness of someone who understood she was delivering complicated news. "The honeymoon suite," she said, smiling at both of them like she was doing them a favor. "King bed, fireplace, soaking tub. It's our nicest room." Sophie, standing between them with her backpack and her eyes at 3/4 power from the nap, looked up at Ethan. "What's a honeymoon suite?" "A room," Ethan said. "A fancy room," Madison said at exactly the same moment. Sophie looked between them. "Are you two married?" "No," they both said, in unison, a little too fast. The woman at the desk smiled wider. Madison put her credit card on the counter. "We'll take it." They rode the elevator in silence. Sophie stood between them, holding Ethan's hand, occasionally yawning so wide her eyes watered. When the doors opened on the 3rd floor, she walked out first and stood in the hallway, looking at the numbered doors with Tollumson concentration of someone navigating serious territory. Ethan carried both bags. Madison held the key card. Neither of them looked at the other. She opened the door. 1 bed, king-sized, centered on the far wall, piled with white pillows and a blanket so thick it looked engineered for comfort. A fireplace on the left wall, already set with wood that just needed a match. A window taking up most of the right wall, showing nothing but gray sky and driving ice. A small sitting area with a love seat and a coffee table. 1 bathroom door ajar to the left. Sophie walked straight to the love seat, dropped her backpack, and climbed up. "I'll sleep here," she announced. "I like small spaces, they feel safe." Ethan looked at her. "You don't have to." "I want to." She pulled the decorative throw pillow onto her lap. "Can I watch something on my tablet?" "Headphones," he said. Obviously. She was already unzipping her bag. Madison was still standing near the door. Ethan turned and found her looking at the bed with an expression that she smoothed over the instant she realized he was watching her. "It's fine," she said. Her voice was even, professional. Exactly the voice she used when something was not entirely fine, and she was choosing not to address it. "It's a big bed," he said. "It is. I can take the floor." "You're not sleeping on the floor." She moved past him toward the bathroom, and that was apparently the end of the discussion. Ethan set the bags down and went to the fireplace. He found the matches on the mantel, struck one, and held it to the paper under the wood until the fire took hold. Sophie immediately looked up from her tablet, like a cat sensing warmth, and scooted to the end of the love seat nearest the fireplace. "Good call, Dad," she said, putting her headphones on. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the fire. From behind the bathroom door, he could hear nothing. Madison Hart was completely quiet, even when she was alone, which said something about her that he'd never been able to fully articulate. She moved through the world without unnecessary sound. She didn't fidget or hum or pace. She was always either fully present or completely internal, with nothing wasted in between. The bathroom door opened. She came out in the same jeans and pullover, face washed, hair still down. She looked at the fire, at Sophie already dissolving into whatever she was watching, and then at Ethan sitting on the edge of the bed, like someone waiting for a verdict. "Stop looking like you're in trouble," she said, moving to the sitting area and pulling her own bag onto the coffee table. "I'm not looking like anything. You're doing the thing where you go completely still. It means you're uncomfortable." He stared at her. "You've cataloged my tells. I've worked with you for 4 years." She pulled out her laptop and sat in the armchair next to the love seat. "You go still when you're uncomfortable. You pull the left side of your mouth in when you're trying not to say something. And you ask about food when you're trying to change the subject a beat. You're not going to ask about food right now because Sophie's not hungry and it wouldn't land. So you're just going to sit there on the edge of that bed and be silently uncomfortable." A pause. "Is there somewhere to eat in this lodge?" he asked. She looked up at him over the laptop screen. Something passed across her face that was dangerously close to a real laugh. She pressed her lips together and looked back at the screen. "Restaurant on the ground floor," she said. "Opens at 6. It was 4:43. He lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The fire crackled. Sophie's tablet made small sounds through her headphones, barely audible. Outside, the ice kept coming. The window was doing its best. "Madison," he said, "does your family know anything about me? Anything real?" A pause before she answered. "They know you work with me. I told them you're reliable and honest." Another pause. "I told them you're a good father." He turned his head. She was still looking at the laptop, but her fingers weren't moving. "You told them that." It seemed relevant. She kept her voice flat. "People who are good fathers don't usually make terrible partners. My family would pick up on that. It's good context." He watched her profile, the straight line of her nose, the set of her jaw. "And Lucas, how much does he know about why you're bringing someone?" Her fingers stopped. "He knows I moved on. That's all he needs to know." "Madison. Ethan. Why is he going to be there?" She was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that Sophie shifted on the love seat, and he thought maybe Madison wasn't going to answer at all. Then she said, "Lucas and my brother played college soccer together. They've been friends for 15 years. My family loved him. They didn't stop loving him just because I ended things." She paused. "They probably still think we'll reconcile. My mother has said as much. Your mother wants you to get back together with him. My mother thinks he was a good match for me on paper." Her voice didn't change. That was the complete evenness. The voice she used when something was costing her, and she refused to let it show. She's not wrong that he looked good on paper. But, looking good on paper and being good for someone are two entirely different things. She closed the laptop gently, set it on the coffee table, folded her hands. "He has a way of making me feel like I'm the problem. Not through cruelty. Lucas isn't cruel. He's too intelligent for cruelty. He just knows which questions to ask, which observations to make. He knows how to make you doubt your own version of events. A beat. I don't doubt well. It makes me less than I am. Around him, I'm a smaller version of myself. And I spent 18 months not realizing it was happening." The fire was the only sound in the room for a moment. That's why you need someone who won't flinch, Ethan said. I need someone who knows who I actually am, so that I can remember it. She looked at him, for the first time since the conversation had shifted into real territory. You know who I am, Ethan, better than almost anyone. He held her gaze. Yeah, he said, I do. Something moved between them in the space of that sentence. Just a flicker. Just the smallest indication of something that had been there longer than either of them had chosen to name. Then it passed, or they let it pass, which amounts to the same thing. Sophie pulled one headphone off. Is it almost 6? I'm kind of hungry. Madison stood up and reached for her jacket. Let's go eat. Dinner at the Lodge restaurant was loud with other stranded travelers, and Sophie sat between them in the booth and ordered pancakes, despite it being 5:45 in the evening, and got maple syrup on her sleeve and talked at length about a book she was reading, about deep-sea creatures. And somehow, in the noise and the ordinary chaos of it, the tension from the room above them dissolved. Madison asked Sophie actual questions about the anglerfish and the vampire squid, and Sophie answered with the kind of relentless, detailed enthusiasm that made most adults smile politely and check out. But Madison tracked every word and asked a follow-up question each time. And Sophie noticed. Later, when he was tucking Sophie into the love seat, with the fireplace throw, and the decorative pillow, and her stuffed rabbit that went everywhere with her, Sophie grabbed his wrist. She's not scary, Sophie whispered. I told you, she's something else. I can't figure out what yet. Sophie pulled the blanket up. I think she's lonely. He looked at her, 7 years old. Go to sleep, bug. I'm right, though. Good night, Sophie. She settled back with the confidence of someone who knows she's right and doesn't need it acknowledged. He turned off the lamp and moved to his side of the king bed, which he decided in his head was the right side, closest to the door, and which he'd also decided in his head he was going to stay strictly on no matter what. Madison was already there, on the left side, lying on her back with her eyes open, looking at the ceiling. She's asleep, Madison said quietly. Give her 3 minutes. They waited. The fire had burned down to low orange. The ice outside had softened to rain. Sophie's breathing slowed and deepened. She said, You're lonely, Ethan said. He hadn't meant to say it. Madison turned her head. She said that. Yeah. A silence. Perceptive kid. She takes after her father. Does she? Madison looked back at the ceiling. You're not lonely, Ethan. You're solitary. There's a difference. What's the difference? Lonely people want company and can't find it. Solitary people find their own company sufficient and don't advertise the gaps. She paused. You have gaps, but they don't control you. He thought about that. And you? I'm the other kind, she said, simply and without any particular self-pity. He didn't answer. There wasn't anything to answer that wouldn't tip into something they hadn't agreed to tip into. So he lay in the dark and listened to the rain and the dying fire and Sophie's steady breathing, and at some point he fell asleep without deciding to. He woke at 2:14 in the morning, according to the clock on the nightstand, and the fire was completely out, and the room was cold enough that he could feel it on his face. He turned. Madison was asleep on her side, facing away from him, the blanket pulled up to her shoulder. Sick, close. Not touching, they'd both maintained their invisible border all night, but close enough that he could see the back of her neck and the loose dark hair against the white pillow. She looked nothing like herself in sleep. The precision was gone. The controlled expression, the careful face she brought to every room, all of it dissolved something quieter and unguarded. She looked like a person carrying something heavy who had finally, for a few hours, been allowed to put it down. He looked at her for exactly as long as it took him to understand that he was looking at her, and then he rolled over and faced the other direction. He didn't sleep again for a long time. By morning the roads were clear. They loaded the car in daylight, thin and cold. Sophie wide awake and asking Madison detailed questions about what a honeymoon suite was really for, and whether you had to be married or just engaged. And Madison answered with the same level patience she'd applied to the anglerfish. And Ethan put the bags in the trunk and pretended he couldn't hear any of it. The drive to the lake house took another 40 minutes. As they got closer, Madison's posture changed. Barely, just a slight squaring of the shoulders. A millimeter of additional height in how she held her head. He'd have missed it if he didn't know her. "You okay?" he said. "Yes." Madison. "I'm always okay." A pause. "I'm fine, Ethan. I know what I'm doing." He didn't argue. But he noted the way her hands adjusted on the wheel, not tighter, exactly, but more deliberate. And he felt the change in the car. The shift from something that had been easy and surprisingly natural into something that required preparation. They were pulling back into their roles, or into a new one. He wasn't sure anymore which was which. The lake house appeared through the trees, a large, well-kept structure with a wide front porch and warm light, already coming from every window even though it was only 10 in the morning. Several cars in the drive. Someone had hung a wreath on the door. There was smoke from a chimney. Madison pulled in and killed the engine and sat for exactly 3 seconds, with both hands still on the wheel. Then she looked at him. "Ready. Born ready," he said, which was almost certainly not true. The ghost of something crossed her face. "Don't say that inside. My brother will make it a whole thing." She got out of the car. He got out. Sophie was already out and standing on the gravel, looking at the house with her hands in her pockets. And then the front door swung open and a woman appeared, who had Madison's bone structure and a completely different energy, warm, effusive, moving fast down the porch steps with her arms already opening. Madison, finally, and then she saw Ethan, and then she saw Sophie. And she stopped on the second step, and her entire face rearranged into something that Ethan could only describe as delighted. "Oh," she said, soft, like she was discovering something she'd hoped for. "Oh, honey." Madison walked forward and let herself be hugged. "Hi, Mom." Her mother hugged her hard and long, and over Madison's shoulder she looked at Ethan with the open, assessing warmth of a woman who had been hoping for exactly this, and had not said so out loud to avoid jinxing it. Then she looked at Sophie. "And who is this?" she said, already moving toward her. "Sophie," Sophie said, extending her hand for a handshake with the solemn formality of a small diplomat. "I'm 7. I read about anglerfish yesterday." Madison's mother laughed, a real one, bright and startled, and took the small hand and shook it. "I'm Carol. I don't know anything about anglerfish, but I made French toast this morning." "That's relevant," Sophie said, and started walking toward the house. Carol looked at Ethan with shining eyes. "She's wonderful." "She is," he said. "I can't take much credit." "Yes, you can." Carol touched his arm briefly. The light touch of someone conferring something. "Yes, you absolutely can. Come inside. Everyone's been waiting." He followed them up the porch steps. At the door he paused and looked back out at the driveway, at the line of cars, counting them without meaning to, looking for one he might recognize. He didn't know what Lucas Grant drove. He didn't know what he looked like beyond the vague impression from a half-visible photo on Madison's phone back when they'd still been together. He didn't know anything about the man, except what Madison had told him in the dark of a lodge rooming film with the fire burning low. He knew enough. He went inside. The house was warm and loud and full of people who all looked at him with various calibrations of curiosity, the politely restrained kind, the openly interested kind, the kind that pretended not to look and then did anyway. Madison moved through the room with her chin up, making introductions in the clean, efficient way she did everything, and Ethan stood beside her and shook hands and answered questions directly, and didn't perform anything. He just showed up, which was the only version of himself he'd ever successfully maintained. Madison's father, Richard, shook his hand with both of his and said, "Madison talks about you." Just that. No elaboration. But he held the handshake a beat longer than necessary, which said something about what he thought. Her brother. James clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Finally, get to meet the man," and then immediately turned to Sophie and crouched down to her level and said, "I heard you know things about deep-sea creatures." And Sophie's eyes lit up, and that was apparently the end of James deciding whether he approved of Ethan, because anyone Sophie approved of was good enough. It was going well, better than he'd expected. The family was warm in the way Madison wasn't, expressive in the way she'd learned to be restrained. And he could see in all of them the parts of her that she'd kept carefully managed, the warmth she rationed, the humor she expressed sideways, the care she delivered through action instead of words. He was starting to relax, just slightly, just the beginning of it. And then he heard James say, across the room, "Hey, Lucas, come meet." And everything inside Ethan went very still. Lucas Grant was taller than he'd expected, lean, dark-haired, the kind of man who looked like he'd been specifically assembled to seem trustworthy, good posture, easy smile. The handshake of someone who'd practiced confidence until it became indistinguishable from the real thing. He crossed the room with his hands loose at his sides, and his expression open and pleasant and completely perfectly calibrated. He looked at Ethan first. Assessment. Done in under a second. Filed away behind the easy smile. Then he looked at Madison. He said, warm, easy, like they were old friends catching up, and not two people on opposite sides of something significant. "It's good to see you." Madison looked at him with a face Ethan recognized, not hostility, not vulnerability. The thing she put on when she was building a wall and didn't want you to see her doing it. "Lucas," she said, "good trip up." "Roads were rough," he said, "but you know me, I adapt." He smiled. Then he looked at Ethan with the same easy pleasantness. "Lucas Grant." "Ethan Cole." He took the handshake. The grip was fine, normal, neither too hard nor too soft. Lucas wasn't that obvious. "Madison mentioned she was bringing someone," Lucas said pleasantly. "I'm glad she did." He said it like he meant it. He probably half meant it. "How long have you two?" "Long enough," Madison said, and she reached over and put her hand on Ethan's arm. Easy, natural, like she'd done it 1,000 times. Ethan didn't look at her hand. He looked at Lucas. Lucas smiled. "Well," he said, "this weekend will be fun." And he moved off toward the kitchen, like nothing had happened, like it had been a conversation about the weather. The room exhaled without meaning to. Madison's hand stayed on Ethan's arm for 2 more seconds. Then she withdrew it and turned away to answer something her mother was saying. And Ethan stood there in the warm, crowded room and understood, for the first time with real clarity, that the weekend had just started, and Lucas Grant was very, very good at this. Better, maybe, than both of them combined. Sophie appeared at his side, tugging his sleeve. "Dad," she said, "there's a golden retriever in the backyard." "Can I go?" "Stay where I can see you," he said. She was already moving. He watched her go and kept Lucas Grant in his peripheral vision the whole time. And he thought about what Madison had said in the dark of the lodge room. He knows how to make you doubt your own version of events. He knows which questions to ask. Ethan's version of events was simple. One weekend, no emotions. Get Madison through this clean and intact. He was already less sure about the simple part. But the rest of it, the getting her through, the keeping her intact, that part, he was not going to waver on. Not for a polished smile and an easy handshake. Not for any amount of quiet, calibrated pressure. He'd learned a long time ago how to hold a circuit under load. He was not going to let this one break. The afternoon settled into the particular rhythm of a family gathering that has been running long enough to have its own rituals. Carol assigned rooms. James built a fire in the main room. Richard opened a bottle of something he'd been saving, and the cousins arrived in a single loud wave around noon that doubled the noise level and made Sophie's eyes wide with the kind of overstimulated joy that Ethan recognized meant she'd crash hard by 8. He stayed close to Madison without hovering. That was the line he was trying to walk, present enough to be credible, contained enough not to crowd her. She was doing her version of the same thing, moving through the family, with the ease of someone who'd grown up in this house and knew every current in it, but touching base with him every 20 minutes or so. A hand on his arm, a look across the room. Small signals that were for the family's benefit, but that he was starting to have trouble reading as purely strategic. Lucas moved through it all like water-finding level. He was good with James, easy with the cousins, attentive to Carol without being obvious about it. He didn't push toward Madison. He didn't need to. He just existed in the same space with the relaxed confidence of someone who knew he wasn't going anywhere and didn't mind waiting. Ethan watched him the way he watched old wiring in a house, not paranoid, just alert. Looking for the place where something might give. It was James who gave him the first real test, and he did it without meaning to. They were in the kitchen, Ethan helping Carol with lunch prep. Because he'd offered, and she'd accepted with the delighted surprise of someone not used to being other beer, when James came in for another beer and leaned against the counter and looked at Ethan with the frank, unhurried assessment of an older brother who had been waiting for a private moment. "So," James said, "how long?" Ethan kept cutting. "We've worked together 4 years." "That's not what I asked." Ethan set the knife down and looked at him. James was built like someone who'd played a contact sport and kept the muscle memory, if not all the muscle. He had Madison's eyes, the same direct quality, the same way of waiting for the real answer, instead of the first one. "About 6 months," Ethan said. He and Madison had agreed on 6 months, far enough back to be established, recent enough not to raise questions about why no one had heard about it. James took a pull from the bottle. "She didn't tell anyone." "She doesn't tell people things until she's sure about them." "Yeah," James nodded. "That's true." He was quiet a moment. "She was a mess after Lucas. She didn't say so, but she was. Called me twice, at 2 in the morning, and then talked about work the whole time, which meant she wasn't talking about the thing she was actually calling about." He looked at Ethan. "She tell you about that period?" "Some of it. He's good at making her feel like she's not enough," James said. "Not with heat, with the flat certainty of someone who'd watched it happen. She knows it intellectually. Knowing it and feeling it are different things with Madison. She'll understand something completely and still let it get to her." "I know," Ethan said, and he meant it. James studied him for another beat. Then something shifted in his posture, a small release of a tension Ethan hadn't been sure was there. "Good," James said, "just that." He pushed off the counter and took his beer and walked out. And Ethan stood in the kitchen, understanding that he had passed something, that he had just something, and that it hadn't required any performance at all. It had just required being honest, which was the one thing he hadn't expected to be the easiest part. Carol, who had been quietly slicing bread through the entire exchange, didn't say anything, but she reached over and touched his arm once, lightly, the same way she'd done on the porch steps. Then she went back to the bread. Ethan picked up the knife and kept cutting. Lunch was loud and good. And Sophie sat between James' youngest and Madison's cousin's daughter and somehow, within 20 minutes, had formed what appeared to be a complete social alliance based on shared opposition to mushrooms in the pasta salad. She ate everything else on her plate and then announced that she was going to need to see the doc. And could someone please show her? And James's youngest, who was 9 and apparently Sophie's new personal hero, grabbed her hand and took her, and Ethan watched them go from the porch with something in his chest that was too warm to be purely relief. It was Madison who came to stand next to him. She held her coffee with both hands. She didn't say anything. They stood and watched Sophie, and the 9-year-old examined the dock with intense seriousness, Sophie gesturing at the water, and the older kid nodding. "She fits," Madison said. "She fits everywhere." He said it with the particular combination of pride and wonder that never really left him when he watched Sophie navigate a new space. "It's her best thing. It's a good thing to have." A pause. "She'll want to come back here." "Probably." Another pause. Longer. He could feel Madison thinking something she wasn't saying, turning it over, testing its weight. "What?" he said. "Nothing." Madison. She turned her head slightly, not to look at him, just to orient. "Lucas talked to my mother this morning, before we arrived. She mentioned it at lunch, said he'd asked whether I seemed happy." Ethan kept his face neutral, and what did she say? She said she thought I was. A beat. She said I'd brought someone, which she'd taken as a good sign. Another beat. "He knew that before he walked into the room. He knew you were going to be here, and he still stood there and shook your hand and smiled like he was happy for me. Because he's better at this than most people." Ethan said, "Yes." She looked down at her coffee. He was testing us. The handshake. The questions he was looking for the seams. Did he find any? She was quiet for a moment. "I don't think so." "Good. But he'll keep looking." She turned then, actually looked at him. And her eyes were doing the thing they'd done in the lodge room, not soft, exactly, but open. Like she was letting him see something she normally kept behind glass. He won't do anything dramatic. He'll just ask the right questions at the wrong moments until someone says something that doesn't line up. That's how he works. Then we don't say anything that doesn't line up. That's harder than it sounds. "It's not that hard," Ethan said. "We just tell the truth." She stared at him. "We're not telling the truth. Ethan, we're telling a version of it." He looked at her directly. "I do know you. We have been through something together this weekend." "I do." He stopped, adjusted. "I do care about getting you through this in one piece. None of that is a lie. We just move the timeline a little." She held his gaze. He could see her turning it over. This reframe. Testing whether it would hold. "Moving the timeline," she said finally. 6 months. Technically, he said. Something happened at the corner of her mouth. Not a full smile, but close. That's a very electrician way of thinking about it. "What does that mean?" "It means you found the wire that was already there and rerouted it, instead of running new cable." She looked back at the dock. "It's a good skill." "I know," he said, and she almost smiled again. And for a moment, the afternoon felt uncomplicated, and easy, and warm in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Then James called, from inside, that there were board games happening, whether anyone wanted them or not, and the moment ended, and they went inside. By 4 o'clock, Lucas had made 3 moves. Ethan had counted them. The first was during Trivial Pursuit, which James had insisted on, and which turned out to be a blood sport in the Hart family. Lucas had partnered with Madison's cousin and played well, and made a point of congratulating Madison specifically when she answered a difficult literature question, leaning forward with a warm and specific compliment about how she'd always been the best reader he knew. It was generous, and it was pointed. Because it invoked a shared history, he'd always been the best reader he knew. Ethan. Something couldn't match, and wasn't supposed to. Ethan didn't react. He was looking at his question card. He answered about electrical load tolerances when the science category came up, and James said, "Of course." And everyone laughed. And Ethan said nothing about literature or shared history, just played his hand and kept the board moving. Madison had felt the Lucas comment land. He'd seen it in the slight tension in her fingers around her card. But she hadn't shown it in her face, and that was the win. The second move came during a card game just before dinner, when Lucas had sat across from Ethan and said, with perfect casualness, "Madison mentioned you have a daughter. That can't be easy, doing this on your own. Not cruel. Almost compassionate. The subtext eraser. You're carrying something heavy. You're not the kind of man she usually chooses." "It's not easy," Ethan said. "It's also the best thing in my life. Those aren't contradictions." Lucas nodded, like that was a reasonable answer, and turned back to his cards. Madison, sitting beside Ethan, had shifted imperceptibly closer. The third move was the one that mattered. Dinner was around the big table, all of them crowded together, with the candles going and the wine out, and the noise of a family that genuinely liked being in the same room. Sophie had been allowed to eat with the cousins in the side room, which she'd received and immediately treated as a social opportunity. Every few minutes, they could hear her voice rising in enthusiasm about something. Carol had put Ethan next to Richard, which he suspected was not accidental. Richard was a quiet man and engineer, retired, the kind of person who listened more than he spoke and meant it both times. He asked Ethan about his work with genuine curiosity and listened to the answers with genuine attention. And Ethan found himself actually talking about the job, rather than performing talking about it, which was a relief. Lucas was across the table and 3 seats down, near enough to observe, far enough to be deniable. He waited until the table was in full voice, until multiple conversations were happening at once, and the noise level made it easy to squint out, addressing the room. And then he said to Madison, pleasantly and without drama, "Do you still go to that little coffee place on Orchard Street, the one with the green awning?" Madison looked at him. Just for a moment, the control wobbled. Ethan saw it. A hairline fracture. "I don't get there as often," she said. "We used to go every Saturday," Lucas said. To no one specifically. To everyone. Nostalgic, warm. We. He was painting something over the table with that single word. For the family to see, without knowing, they were seeing it. Best pastries. "You always got the almond croissant," he smiled at her. "Some things you just know about a person." The table had tilted very slightly, not obviously, but Ethan felt it. And then, without quite deciding to, he said, "She orders the plane now, quietly, naturally, like it was a small observation, not a counter-move. Said the almond is too sweet in the afternoon. We've been going Sundays instead." He hadn't known this. He was building it from what he knew about her coffee order when she got it from the site truck, her comments about sugar content in things, the pattern of when she seemed more or less herself during the week. Madison turned to look at him. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were not. "Sundays," she said. Quiet, confirming it. "Sundays," he said. Lucas smiled. And this time the smile had something different in it, not warmth, but recalculation. He looked at Ethan with new attention. The pleasant surface was still there, but underneath it, something had adjusted. He had found a seam, and Ethan had stitched it before he could get his fingers in. Richard, who had been listening without appearing to, lifted his glass toward Ethan. Not a toast, just a small acknowledgement, the gesture of a man who had watched his daughter navigate something difficult for a long time and had just seen someone be useful to her without making it about himself. Ethan lifted his water glass slightly in return. Lucas looked down at his plate. The table kept moving. The noise stayed up. Sophie's laughter came from the side room at regular intervals, like a small, reliable bell. After dinner, Madison found him in the hallway near the coat closet where he'd gone to check his phone. Sophie's after-dinner protocol required a quick video call with the neighbor who'd been watching their cat, a ritual Sophie had instituted and would not compromise on. Madison waited until he'd hung up. Then she stepped close enough that they couldn't be overheard by anyone in the main room, and said, "The coffee thing. Yeah. How did you don't know what I order? I know you don't take sugar in your coffee. I know you've said twice in the last month that things are too rich after about 2 in the afternoon. I extrapolated." She stared at him. "You extrapolated." It was a reasonable extrapolation. It was a perfect extrapolation. She said it with something that was almost frustration. The frustration of someone who is impressed and doesn't want to be. "He was trying to remind my family that he knows me, that he has all this history, and you just—" "I know you too," Ethan said, simply, "not the same way, but I do." She was close enough that he could see the small lines of tiredness around her eyes, the slight color in her face from the wine at dinner, the thing happening in her expression that she kept almost letting through and then pulling back. "Yes," she said, finally, like she'd been working up to it. "You do." They stood there a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then James's voice carried from the main room, "Board games round 2. Non-negotiable and the spell," or whatever it was. broke, and they went back in. Sophie fell asleep on the couch at 8:47, slumped against James's youngest, with her mouth slightly open and her hair in her face. Ethan carried her up to the room they'd been given, a small one with 2 twin beds, and tucked her in and stood over her in the dark for a moment, listening to her breathe. 7 years old, fitting in everywhere, noticing that Madison was lonely. "I know," he said quietly to the dark room, because Sophie had been right and deserved the acknowledgement even asleep. He went back downstairs. The main room had quieted. The cousins had migrated to the back porch. Richard and Carol had gone to bed with the dignified punctuality of people who had earned their sleep schedule. James and his wife were cleaning up in the kitchen with the practiced efficiency of a couple with a system. That left Ethan and Madison and Lucas, the 3 of them in the main room, with the fire going and the board game still half set up on the table and 2 bottles of wine to fun down to their last inches. Lucas was in the armchair. Madison was on the far end of the couch. Ethan came and sat on the near end of the couch, not close to her, not far present. Lucas looked at the fire. "Good weekend so far," he said. "Conversational, peaceful." "It is," Madison said. "Your family as well, a beat. Your mom seems happy. She always is when everyone's here. She said you've seemed better lately." He looked at her, calm, gentle, even. "I'm glad. I did worry about you." "You don't need to worry about me," Madison said, and her voice was steady. "Force of habit," he smiled. Said it to Ethan. "She never lets anyone worry about her. I'm sure you've figured that out." "I figured out she handles things," Ethan said. "That's not the same as not needing people. She's good at knowing which people are worth needing." A beat. Lucas looked at him with that recalculating look again. "That's a good way to put it," he said. Still pleasant, still smooth, but something in him had gone slightly more alert. Like a man who'd been playing a casual game and just realized the person across from him had been playing a different game the whole time. The fire crackled. The kitchen sounds filtered in. From outside came cold air through a window someone had cracked, carrying the smell of the lake. "I should turn in," Lucas said. He stood, unhurried. "Good talking with you both." He looked at Madison one more time, a long look, the kind that was meant to travel, to land somewhere and stay. "You look good. Happy." He said it like a compliment. He said it like a goodbye to something. "Good night." He went up the stairs. The room exhaled. Ethan looked at Madison. She was looking at the fire. Her shoulders had dropped, just slightly the first time since they'd arrived that she'd let them. "You okay?" he said. She was quiet a long moment. He said I looked happy. Her voice was complicated. "I think he meant it." "I think he did too." "That's almost worse." She looked at him. "Because the whole time I'm looking at him, I'm waiting for the doubt to start. I'm waiting for the voice in my head that tells me I'm wrong about my own life." And she stopped. It didn't come this time. She seemed genuinely surprised by this. "I kept waiting and it didn't come." "Because you weren't alone in there with it," Ethan said. She looked at him steadily. "No," she said, "I wasn't." The fire popped. Somewhere upstairs a door closed. The house settled into its nighttime sounds, the creaks and shifts of an old structure finding its rest. "Thank you," she said. "Just that. Quiet and plain, and nothing like performance." He nodded. "Didn't make it a thing." "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's the full day." She stood, pulled her cardigan tighter, paused. "Ethan." She said his name like she was about to say something after it and then changed her mind. Just his name. Sitting there. "Good night." "Good night, Madison." She went up the stairs. Ethan stayed by the fire a while longer, watching the coals, thinking about moving the timeline, about extrapolation, about the look on her face when she'd said I wasn't alone in there with it, like it was a discovery she'd been surprised to make. He thought about what Sophie had said in the lodge room, half asleep under the fireplace throw. "I think she's lonely." He'd told her to go to sleep. He hadn't told her she was wrong. He put the fire screen up, turned off the lamp, and went upstairs. Tomorrow was the full day. And Lucas Grant had lost the first round without fully realizing it, which meant the next move would be more deliberate. Ethan had no doubt about that. He was ready. Or he thought he was. He'd been wrong about that kind of thing before. Thought he knew how much load a situation could carry. Thought he'd properly calculated the risk. And then something shifted. One variable he hadn't accounted for. One feeling that hadn't been in the plan. He lay in the narrow twin bed, across from Sophie's, and listened to her breathing, and stared at the dark ceiling. He was not going to think about the way Madison had said his name. Just his name, nothing after it. He was absolutely not going to think about that. He thought about it for 45 minutes before he finally fell asleep. Sunday morning arrived with the particular cruelty of mornings that follow nights when you haven't slept enough, and the day ahead requires more than you've got in reserve. Ethan was up at 5:43, not by alarm, by the internal clock that had been running since Sophie was born and never fully shut off, the one that woke him at odd hours to check on things, to inventory whatever needed inventorying. He lay still for a few minutes, listening to the house. Sophie breathing across the room, below the furnace cycling, somewhere outside. A bird making an early and optimistic argument about the day. He got up quietly, pulled on jeans and a flannel, and went downstairs. The kitchen was empty. He found the coffee, found the filters, figured out Carol's machine by the third button, and stood at the counter while it ran and thought about nothing in particular, with a focus that was itself a kind of thinking. He heard footsteps on the stairs at 6:10, light, deliberate. He knew them. Madison came into the kitchen in running clothes leggings, a long sleeve layer, her hair in a tight ponytail. She stopped when she saw him, just for a moment. Then she moved to the cabinet for a mug, like she'd expected him to be there all along. "You run," he said. "Every morning I can." She poured. "You're up early." "Always am." She held the mug in both hands and leaned against the opposite counter and looked at him in the early morning, quiet with the particular openness that exhaustion and dawn produce in people before they've rebuilt their defenses for the day. "How'd you sleep?" "Fine," he said, which was 60% true. "Liar," she said without heat. "You had the ceiling face." "I don't have a ceiling face." "You were staring at it when I came down. You do it when you're working something out." She sipped her coffee. "What are you working out?" He looked at her. In the morning light, without the performance of the day on her, she'd looked like the person Sophie had correctly identified, the one carrying something heavier than she let on. Not broken, not fragile. Just tired in the way people get when they've been holding things together by will alone for long enough. "Lucas," he said, "he lost last night and he knows it. That means today he tries something different." She nodded slowly. "He won't come at it the same way twice." "No. He'll go for something I can't deflect with you, standing next to me." She set the mug down. "Something that requires me to respond on my own. Something that reminds me who I was when I was with him. Then don't let him get you alone. In this house, with this many people. That's harder than it sounds." "I know. I'll stay close." She looked at him a long moment. Something worked in her expression, gratitude complicated by something she wasn't ready to name. "You don't have to do that, Ethan. I know this isn't what you—" "I know what I signed up for," he said. Steady. "And I'm not renegotiating the terms in the middle of the job." That landed somewhere in her. He could see it, the slight change in her posture, the way something released that had been tight. "The job," she repeated. Figure of speech. She looked at her coffee. "Is it?" He didn't answer that. Instead, he poured his own mug and said, "Go run, you'll think clearer. I'll handle Sophie's breakfast when she gets up." She looked at him for one more beat, like she was going to push it, and then she didn't. She picked up her mug, finished it in 2 efficient swallows, set it in the sink, and went to the door. "Ethan." She had her hand on the frame, didn't turn around. "Yeah, thank you." For real, not the figure of speech. The door closed behind her. He stood in the quiet kitchen and drank his coffee and told himself it was fine, all of it. He told himself it clearly and with conviction, and then spent the next 20 minutes not entirely convincing himself. Sophie came down at 7:15 in her pajamas, with her hair suggesting she'd been in a wind tunnel, and her priorities completely sorted. "Is there more French toast?" she said. "Or did the cousins eat it all?" "I'll make eggs," he said. "Go wash your face." The cousins ate it, she diagnosed, correctly, and went to wash her face. By 9, the house was fully awake and moving, and Carol had produced a breakfast that covered every surface of the dining table, and the cousins arrived from the side room in various states of readiness, and James made coffee for everyone with the focused generosity of a man who understood that caffeine was his primary social contribution, and was at peace with that. Lucas came down at 9:15, clean, composed, in a fleece and jeans that managed to look considered without appearing to try. He said good morning to the table at large, poured coffee, and took a seat near James, and was immediately and easily folded back into the family conversation. Madison came in from her run at 9:20, flushed and present in a way she only seemed to be after physical exertion, and the table responded to her the way it always did, with warmth and noise, and Carol immediately producing a plate of things. She sat down next to Ethan and reached across him for the orange juice, with a naturalness that was either very good performance or something else, and he decided not to evaluate which. Sophie looked up from her eggs. "You run," she said to Madison. "Every morning." "My dad runs too," Sophie said. "But he goes at 5 and it's too dark, and I don't understand it." "It's quiet at 5, Madison said. Sophie considered this. "I like quiet," she said, with the thoughtfulness of a child, taking an actual position, "but not when it's also dark. Quiet and light is better." "You're not wrong," Madison said. Sophie appeared pleased to be confirmed and went back to her eggs. Ethan watched James watching this exchange, the small smile on his face, the satisfaction of a man seeing something he'd hoped for without being sure he'd get it. James caught Ethan's eye and looked away first, which was its own kind of message. The morning moved. There was a walk, after breakfast, down to the lake and back, enough for the adults to move after the previous day's eating, enough for the kids to burn something off before they turned feral. James organized it with military efficiency. Sophie immediately attached herself to James's youngest, and they set off at a speed that suggested they had a destination in mind. Ethan walked beside Madison. Lucas fell in with James's wife, 3 places back, easy and conversational. The path was wide enough for 2. The morning was cold and clear, the kind that sharpened everything, sounds carrying further, colors more definite, breath visible. Madison set a pace that was brisk without being punishing and didn't talk much, which he'd learned was how she preferred to walk. He matched her, without comment. They were halfway to the lake when she said, quietly, "He cornered my mother this morning, before I got back." He kept his pace. "How do you know?" "She had a specific look when I came in, the one she gets when she's been told something she's trying to decide how to handle, a beat. And she asked me, very casually, whether I was happy. Second time in 2 days. Someone prompted it. What did you tell her?" I said yes. She glanced at him, and I meant it, which surprised me. He felt that in a place he was choosing not to examine. He looked at the path ahead. "What do you think he told her?" he said. Something gentle, something that sounded like concern. Her jaw set. He's good at concern. He'll say something like, "He just wants to make sure I'm not rushing into anything, that he knows how I get after a hard period, how I want to move past things quickly." He'll frame it as caring about me. "And your mother will worry without realizing he planted it." Exactly. She exhaled. "He's been doing this for 10 years with my family. He has equity. I don't have time to match in one weekend." "You don't need to match it," Ethan said. "You just need to stand in it without moving." She looked at him sideways. "What does that mean?" "It means he's applying pressure, expecting you to shift. If you don't shift, The pressure has nowhere to go. He paused. Don't try to win points. Just don't give ground. That's all. She was quiet a few steps. You're surprisingly good at this. I'm good at load bearing, he said. It's basically the same principle. She almost laughed. He heard it, the thing that happened in her breath, just before a real laugh. The small give of it. She caught it and held it, but the shape of it was there. Sophie's voice reached them from somewhere ahead, delighted and loud about something. And the path opened onto the lakefront, and the path before, and the whole group spread out along the edge, the cousins finding rocks to throw, James pointing at something on the water, Carol taking pictures. Lucas appeared beside Madison so smoothly and naturally that it took Ethan a beat to register the move. One moment he was 3 people back. The next he was just to her left, with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the water, positioned not in front of her or across from her, but alongside. Casual and non-confrontational. Beautiful morning, he said. It is, Madison said. A pause. Lucas bent down and picked up a flat stone, turned it in his fingers. Remember that summer we kayaked out to the far point. Still easy, still warm, still invoking we got caught in the rain coming back. I remember, Madison said. That was a good summer. He threw the stone. It skipped 4 times. I think about that sometimes. Madison said nothing. I'm not trying to make this weird, Lucas said. And he said it with such genuine sounding earnestness that Ethan almost believed it. I just want you to know that I don't hold any of it against you. The way things ended. I understand why you needed to go. Madison turned her head and looked at him. Lucas. I mean it. He looked at her with the open, unguarded expression of a man who knew exactly how to wear open and unguarded. You seem really good. He seems like a good man. He glanced at Ethan briefly. Inclusive, not threatening. I'm glad you found someone steady. You deserve steady. It was perfect. It was absolutely perfect. And that was precisely the problem, because it gave Madison nothing to push against. It was generous and warm, and it had you deserve in it, which was the loaded phrase, the one that sounded like a gift and worked like a knife, because embedded in you deserve steady was the suggestion that she hadn't had it before, that she'd been unsteady, that she'd needed something she'd been unable to get from him. Ethan felt Madison pull in a breath, and then he said, calmly and without drama, she's always been steady. That didn't come from me. Lucas looked at him. Ethan met it directly. You can't give someone steadiness, he said. It's either in them or it isn't. Madison's been the most grounded person in every room I've ever watched her walk into, including this one. He said it to Lucas, not to Madison, not to the air, direct. I'm just glad she let me be in the room. The silence lasted exactly long enough. Lucas held his gaze for a beat. Then he nodded once, a small, genuine nod, the first unperformed thing Ethan had seen from him all weekend. Fair enough, he said. And he walked away, toward James, without further comment. Madison turned to look at Ethan. He could see what was in her face, and he chose not to name it, not to make it a thing. Just let it exist in the cold, clear morning between them. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yes, I did, he said. She looked at him, really looked, and then she reached over and took his hand and held it, not for the family, not for Lucas. He knew, because no one was close enough to see it, the cousins throwing rocks, James pointing at the water, Carol taking pictures. No audience, just her hand in his, cold from the morning, and his hand holding it back because he was not going to let go. They stood at the lake's edge for 3 minutes, saying nothing. Then Sophie came running up, holding a rock. Dad, look at this one. I think it's quartz. She held it up. Then she looked at their joined hands. Then she looked at Madison. Then back at Ethan. She said nothing. But her face did something so quietly satisfied that Ethan wanted to have a whole separate conversation with her about the dangers of being right. It might be quartz, he said, examining the rock. Good find, bug. Sophie smiled and ran back to the water with her treasure. The afternoon turned. Lunch happened, loud and good. Sophie spent 40 minutes teaching James's youngest a card game she'd invented, with rules that evolved to serve her interests. And James's youngest accepted this cheerfully, which said good things about his character. Lucas stayed in the group, but receded, not dramatically, not a retreat, more of a strategic consolidation. He was warm at lunch, funny with the cousins, easy with Richard. He was simply less focused on Madison, and in the specific way of someone who had concluded that the direct approach was no longer productive, which meant the next move would be lateral, and it came at 3 in the afternoon, when the group had drifted into the comfortable post-lunch arrangement of people who are full and warm and have nowhere urgent to be. Ethan was helping Richard with something in the garage, a shelf bracket that had been threatening to give way when he heard Sophie's voice, and then Madison's voice, and then a third voice that resolved into Lucas. And he had a specific feeling in his chest that he'd learned to pay attention to. He finished the bracket, thanked Richard, and walked back into the house. They were in the living room, Sophie on the couch, Madison in the armchair, Lucas on the ottoman across from Sophie, and Sophie was showing him the quartz rock with the earnest authority she applied to all geological matters, probably formed under heat and pressure. Sophie was explaining, "That's how quartz happens." "Interesting," Lucas said. He was good with her patient, genuinely interested, which made it worse because it wasn't fake. He looked up at Ethan coming in and said, "Your daughter's fascinating." "I know," Ethan said. He sat on the arm of Madison's chair without thinking about it, just sat there naturally, the way you do when there's no seat, and also when you want to be clear about where you are. Madison didn't move. He felt her adjust slightly, tilting almost imperceptibly toward him. "I was just asking Sophie how long she'd known Madison," Lucas said, casually, still warm. Ethan looked at Sophie. Sophie was looking at the rock. Then she looked up at Lucas with the direct, assessing stare she got when she was deciding something. "Long enough," Sophie said. Lucas blinked. That's what grown-ups say when they don't want to give a specific number," Sophie said. "I thought you might be testing the story. My dad says that's a real thing adults do." She held up the quartz. "Do you want to hold it? It's heavier than it looks." The room went absolutely still. Lucas looked at this 7-year-old. Then he looked at Ethan, then at Madison, then back at Sophie. And for the first time all weekend, Lucas Grant looked like a man who had not fully anticipated where he was standing. "Sure," he said, and took the rock. Sophie watched him hold it with the scientific patience of someone administering a test. Then she nodded to herself and took the rock back and climbed off the couch. "I'm going to find more," she announced, and walked out of the room with the self-possession of someone who had concluded her business. Send can't entreat further need to be present. The 3 of them watched her go. Then Lucas let out a long, slow breath, and he laughed. A real one, surprised out of him, genuine in the way almost nothing else this weekend had been. He shook his head. "She's something else," he said to Ethan, and he meant it. No angle. Just a man registering that he'd been outplayed by a 7-year-old and finding it more funny than he found it threatening. "Yeah," Ethan said. "She is." Lucas looked at Madison, and in his eyes, for just that 1 second, Ethan could see it, not defeat, not anger, but the specific expression of a man who has understood something about what he'd lost, and understood it too late to change it. Not the relationship, not the history, but the category. The kind of life that produced a morning like this one easy, warm, full of river stones and French toast, and a kid who saw through pretense without being cruel about it. He'd been competing on the wrong terms the whole time. "I'm going to get some air," Lucas said. He stood, nodded at them both, just a nod, clean and without performance. And then he walked out the back door and didn't come back. Inside for the better part of an hour. Madison let out a breath beside him, slow and full, the kind that's been held a long time. "Your daughter," she said. "I know." She knew. She always knows. He stood up from the arm of her chair and looked down at her. Her face was open and tired, and relieved in the way faces get when something they've been braced against for a long time finally shows signs of passing. "You okay?" "I'm yes." She looked up at him. "I'm genuinely okay." "Good." "Ethan." She said his name, again like that, with the pause after it. The same way she had the night before on the stairs. And this time, she didn't stop herself. "What happens when we go home?" He looked at her. The question was there between them, real and immediate, and asking more than its surface words. "We figure it out," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the honest one." He held her gaze. "I'm not going to make you a promise in the middle of someone else's situation. When we're home. When it's real. Then we figure it out." She held his gaze for a long moment, reading him the way she read everything, not for comfort, but for truth. For whether the structure would hold. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. Sophie reappeared in the doorway, holding 2 more rocks and best shoot now, and looking between them with the expression of someone who had been right about everything and was being gracious about it. "I found feldspar," she announced. "Probably. And I think there might be mica." "Show me," Madison said, and moved over on the chair to make room, and Sophie climbed up beside her with the rocks and started explaining. And Ethan sat on the couch across from them and watched and didn't say anything at all. Because there was nothing to say, because whatever this was, it had already started being something before he'd found the right word for it. And the word didn't matter as much as the fact of it. Sophie pressed against Madison's side, pointing at the gray flecks in the feldspar. Madison actually looking, actually listening. The fire going in the corner and the afternoon light going long and gold through the windows. He'd said he was managing, surviving each day quietly. He was beginning to understand he'd been wrong about what surviving looked like. That night, after dinner, after the cousins and the noise had settled, after Richard and Carol had gone up, and James and his wife were somewhere in the back of the house that night, Madison found him on the front porch. He was sitting in the cold without his jacket because he'd needed air and hadn't thought ahead. She came out with his jacket and set it on his shoulders without comment. He put it on. She sat in the other chair. The dark outside was complete, the way it only gets far from cities total and full of stars, and the sound of water moving somewhere unseen. "He's leaving tomorrow morning," she said. "He told James tonight, said he had something come up." Ethan nodded. "Good. He didn't have anything come up." "I know. He's leaving because he's done." She said it without satisfaction and without sorrow, just clarity. "He came here thinking he could get something back, and he can't. He's smart enough to recognize it." What did he want to get back? She was quiet a moment. "I think he wanted to know if I still doubted myself around him. If I was still the version of me that shrank." She paused. "And I'm not. And I think part of him is relieved. In the specific a way people are relieved when they realize the thing they wanted wouldn't have made them happy anyway." Ethan looked at the dark. "That's generous. I've had time to think about what he is and isn't." She folded her arms against the cold. "He's not a bad person. He's just someone who made me less. And I let him. And neither of those things is forgivable in the long run." She turned her head. "You make me more." He looked at her. "I don't mean that, as I'm not saying it like a declaration," she said. And there was something almost uncomfortable in her voice. The discomfort of someone being more honest than they'd planned. "I mean it factually. When you're in a room, I'm more myself. I've been more myself this entire weekend than I've been in 2 years." She looked at the stars. "I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it right now," he said. "I know. A breath, I know." The stars were where they'd always been. The water moved in the dark. From inside, through the walls, came the faint sound of a television and James's laugh at something. "When we go home," she said, quietly. And she said it like a question and like an answer at the same time. "When we go home," he confirmed. She reached over between the chairs and found his hand in the dark. He held it. They sat there until the cold got serious about itself, and then they went inside without letting go until the door required it. And even then only barely. Lucas's car was gone by 7:15 Monday morning. Ethan heard it leave. He'd been awake already, same as every morning. Lying in the narrow twin bed, listening to Sophie breathe and to the house settle, and to the particular quality of silence that precedes something ending. The engine turned over outside, tires moved on gravel, and then it was gone, and the silence that replaced it was a different kind cleaner, with less weight in it. Sophie stirred. Someone leaving. Go back to sleep. Who? Not us. Sleep. She pulled the blanket over her head and was unconscious again in 40 seconds. Ethan lay there a while longer and stared at the ceiling and felt the strange, specific relief of a pressure that has been removed, not the relief of winning something, just the relief of a load redistributing back to manageable. He got up, made coffee, stood at the kitchen window and drank it in the dark before the house woke up, and he let himself have that quiet for exactly as long as it lasted. Madison came downstairs at 6:45, already dressed, no running clothes today. She was packed. He realized she'd brought her bag down. She poured coffee, saw his face, understood from it without asking. He's gone, she said. Left about an hour ago. She nodded, held her mug, said nothing for a long moment, and he didn't push it. Just let her have the quiet the same way he'd let himself have it. How do you feel? He said finally. She thought about it, actually thought about it, the way she did when she wasn't going to give the automatic answer. Like something I've been carrying for 2 years just got lighter, she said. Not gone, but lighter. She looked at him. Is that strange? No, he said. That's what release feels like. You forget it's possible until it happens. She held his gaze a moment. Then she looked back at her coffee. We should wake Sophie. Drives 3 hours. She's half awake already. Give her 10 minutes. They stood in the kitchen in the early quiet and finished their coffee and didn't need to fill it with anything, which was its own kind of answer to the question neither of them had fully asked yet. Breakfast was Carol's doing. She'd been up before both of them, apparently, and produced eggs and toast and the last of the orange juice, and set it all out like it was something she'd been planning. She moved around the kitchen with the brisk warmth of a woman who expresses love through feeding people, and knows it, and has no apologies about it. Sophie appeared at 7:20 in yesterday's clothes, with her hair pointing in 3 directions, and immediately said, "Is there orange juice?" "Sit down," Carol said, already pouring. Sophie sat, looked at the table, looked at Carol. "You didn't have to do all this." "I wanted to," Carol said simply. Sophie considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "Okay," she said. "Thank you." Carol looked at Madison over Sophie's head with an expression that was equal parts warmth and something that looked like a decision being confirmed. Madison looked at her eggs. Richard came down at 7:30, found Ethan at the sink rinsing plates, and stood beside him and picked up a dish towel without being asked. They did the dishes together for 5 minutes without talking. Then Richard said, "She hasn't brought anyone here in 3 years." Ethan kept rinsing. "I know. She's careful," Richard said, "about everything. But especially about people." He set a dry plate in the rack. "She gets that from me. Which means I understand it better than I can fix it." "It doesn't need fixing," Ethan said. Richard looked at him sideways. "No," he said, after a moment. "I suppose it doesn't." He put the towel on the counter and put his hand briefly on Ethan's shoulder just a moment, just the weight of it, and then went to pour himself coffee and joined Sophie in a conversation about igneous rock that Sophie had apparently been waiting to have with someone who had an engineering background. James appeared last at 7:45, with the look of a man who needed at least 2 more hours, and was choosing not to take them out of stubbornness. He found Ethan in the hallway pulling on his jacket and stood there, with his arms crossed and his coffee, and looked at him. "You drive in," James said. Madison is. Good. She's better in the mountains. He sipped. You coming back? Ethan looked at him. To the lake house. To the family. To this. James gestured loosely at the house, at the table, at the sound of Sophie, explaining tectonic pressure to Richard. Are you coming back? It was not quite a question. It was the way older brothers ask things when they've already decided on the answer they want, and they're giving you the chance to confirm it before they proceed on that assumption. Yeah, Ethan said. I think I am. James nodded, satisfied, like a man ticking a box he'd kept open for a long time. Good, he said. Sophie knows where the good rocks are. She'll want to come back for them. She will, Ethan agreed. Bring her, James said, just that, and went back to the kitchen. The goodbyes took 30 minutes, which was about right for a family this size. Carol hugged Madison first, and held on longer than usual, and said something in her ear that Ethan couldn't hear. And Madison went slightly still, and then nodded once, her chin against her mother's shoulder. Then Carol hugged Ethan with the full warmth of a woman who has decided something and acts on her decisions without equivocation, and said, You come back soon. And he said, We will, and meant it. Sophie hugged James's youngest with the fervor of a child and float, saying goodbye to a 2-day friendship that had felt eternal, and they exchanged information about their respective rock collections with the gravity of diplomats establishing trade agreements. Richard shook Ethan's hand with both of his again. James's wife told Sophie she was welcome anytime, which Sophie received as an official invitation and immediately began making theoretical plans. They loaded the car. Ethan put the bags in. Madison buckled Sophie in the back seat, and Sophie immediately produced her tablet, and her headphones, and her stuffed rabbit, and arranged them around her with the efficiency of someone settling in for a journey she'd done before. Madison started the engine. She looked in the rearview mirror at the house, at the family on the porch, Carol waving. Richard's hand lifted. James with his coffee duffels, and her face did something that Ethan watched from the passenger seat and didn't comment on. Just let her have it. Then she put the car in drive and they went. The first hour was quiet, in the way that follows full and complicated things. Sophie watched something on her tablet, with her headphones on, her small feet crossed at the ankles. The mountains came and went. The road curved and descended. Madison drove, with both hands on the wheel and her eyes on the road, and Ethan looked out the window and let the silence be what it was. He was thinking about what Richard had said, about what James had said, about Carol's hand on his arm twice, 3 times, conferring something each time. He was thinking about standing at the lake edge holding Madison's hand while no one was watching. He was thinking about her voice in the dark on the porch the night before. You make me more, said like a fact, like something uncomfortable in its plainness. Like a woman who dealt in precision and had just measured something and found she couldn't round it down. He was thinking about going home, about what, when we get home, actually meant in practice, the drive back, the return to Monday, the job site, and Sophie's school, and the 1,000 ordinary things that made up a Tuesday, and whether what had happened in a storm-caught lodge, and a lake house kitchen, and on a cold front porch, under winter stars, had any continuity with real life, or whether it was something that existed only in that compressed, pressure-cooked space where pretending and not pretending had gotten their wires crossed. He was almost certainly overthinking it. He was very good at overthinking things. It was the other side of being methodical. At the 1-hour mark, Madison said, without preamble, Say what you're thinking. He looked at her. You can tell I'm thinking something. You've been still for an hour. That's not rest still. That's working something out still. He'd forgotten she'd cataloged his tells. He'd have to be more careful about that, except he suspected it was already too late. I'm thinking about what happens today, he said. Practically, you drop us off. I take Sophie home. We go back to Monday. And I don't know what Monday looks like now. She was quiet a few seconds. Neither do I. That doesn't bother you. Of course it bothers me. Her hands adjusted on the wheel. I like knowing what things look like. I plan for things. I built a whole career on anticipating variables. A pause. But I've been planning around the wrong thing for 2 years. I've been planning around how to be okay on my own and not need anyone and not give anyone the power to make me smaller. She glanced at him, just briefly, and then this weekend happened, and none of my plans applied. Because I wasn't a variable you'd planned for, he said. You were always a variable I'd planned around, she said. Which is different. I knew you were there. I factored you in. I kept you in a category that was safe, manageable. And now I don't have a category for you. She said it plainly, without drama, the way she said hard things when she decided to say them. And that should terrify me. Historically, it would terrify me. But she didn't answer immediately. Let the road take a long curve. Then. But I held your hand last night, and it felt like the most uncomplicated thing I've done in years. And complicated is what I'm good at. So I don't know what to do with uncomplicated. Ethan looked at her profile, the straight line of her, the set of her hands, the particular quality of her face, when she was being absolutely honest about something that cost her something to say. You don't have to do anything with it right now, he said. You said that last night, too. It's still true. Ethan, her voice shifted. Just slightly something tighter in it, something that had been wound all weekend and was still wound now, even with Lucas gone, even with the house behind them and the road ahead. I am not good at this. I want you to know that. I am not a person who does this gracefully. I will be too careful and then suddenly not careful enough, and I will overcorrect, and I will manage things that shouldn't be managed, and I will work too late, and I will forget to say the things that should be said out loud. And, Madison. She stopped. I know you, he said. A beat. I know all of that already, he said. I've worked next to you for 4 years. I've watched you manage things that shouldn't be managed, and work too late, and not say the things out loud. I know exactly what I'm looking at. Her knuckles had gone slightly white on the wheel. And I'm still here, he said. I didn't show up this weekend because I had nothing better to do. I showed up because when you knocked on my door and asked me for something, I wanted to be the person who could give it to you. I have wanted to be that person for longer than this weekend. The silence after that was different from the silence before it, loaded in a different direction. Sophie's voice came from the back seat, headphones off. Are you guys having a moment? They both turned. Sophie was looking at them with the patient, knowing expression of a 7-year-old Mytik Twanenstreet who has been quietly monitoring the front street for development. Watch your show, Ethan said. I finished it. She held up the tablet. It ended sad. I need a minute. She looked between them. You were definitely having a moment. Sophie, Ethan said. I'm just noting it. She put her headphones back on. Carry on. She went back to her tablet with the dignity of someone who has made her point and requires no further acknowledgement. Madison made a sound. A real one, the laugh she'd been holding the whole weekend. The genuine unguarded one she'd been catching and containing. It came out now, quiet and surprised and completely real. And she pressed her lips together, trying to manage it, and failed entirely. And Ethan watched her fail, and felt something in his chest that had been coiled tight for longer than he'd admitted release all at once. Your daughter, Madison said, when she'd recovered. I know, he said. I know. The rest of the drive passed differently lighter. The windows clear. And the road, straightening as they came, out of the mountains and back toward the valley. And the familiar of the town where both their lives were. Sophie fell asleep again at the 2-hour mark. With the reliability of someone who treats car travel as a sleep opportunity, the mountains gave way to lowland, and the lowland gave way to the Lake District's edge, and then the streets Ethan knew. Madison pulled up in front of his house at 12:43 in the afternoon. She cut the engine. They sat for a moment in the quiet with Sophie still asleep in the back. I'll get her, Ethan said, but didn't move yet. Madison was looking at his house, the small porch, the front door, the window where Sophie's drawings were taped from inside in uneven rows. She looked at it like she was registering something. "She put those up herself," Ethan said. "I can tell." A pause. "She drew one of you. Second from the left." He looked. He'd seen it so many times, he'd stopped seeing it, a large stick figure with dark scribbled hair next to a small one with a round face and what appeared to be a crown. "She gave me better hair than I have," he said. "She gave you a daughter who sees everything," Madison said, quietly. "That's better than hair." He looked at her. She was looking at the drawing still, and her face had the thing in it that it had on the porch last night, unguarded, tired in the good way. Like someone who has been vigilant for a long time and is considering, for the first time, what it would feel like to put the watch down. "Come inside," he said. Just that. No performance, no strategy. She turned and looked at him. "Have coffee," he said. "Sophie will wake up and tell you about the drawings, and you can tell her the geological composition of the rocks she collected, and we can figure out what Monday looks like in the actual light of an actual day." He held her gaze. "Come inside." A beat. 2. She was doing the calculation, he could see it. The old habit. The measuring of variables and outcomes. And then he watched her stop doing it. Consciously set it down. "Okay," she said. They got Sophie inside. She woke up in the transfer. Registered that she was home. Announced that she needed her rocks unpacked immediately. And was set loose into the house while Ethan started the coffee, and Madison stood in his kitchen and looked around at the specific evidence of a life, the drawings on the refrigerator, the chore chart on the wall, the coffee mug that said "One Dad," that Sophie had given him with great ceremony last Father's Day, and that he used every single morning, the small running shoes by the door next to the large ones. "It looks like you," Madison said. "Does it? Functional, no waste, but warm underneath." She touched the One Dad mug lightly with 2 fingers. "She gave you this. Picked it out herself, wrapped it herself, spelled happy wrong on the card, and didn't care." Madison's looked at the mug for a moment longer than necessary. She sat down at the kitchen table and he put coffee in front of her, and she held it, and he sat across from her. And Sophie thundered down the hallway and appeared in the doorway, holding her rock collection bag. "Can I put them on the table?" Sophie asked. "After we eat," Ethan said. "You haven't had lunch." "What's for lunch?" "What do you want?" Sophie looked at Madison. "Do you like grilled cheese?" "Yes," Madison said. Sophie looked at Ethan. "Grilled cheese," she said, with the finality of a consensus reached, and went to put her rocks in her room, with the temporary patience of someone who has secured the important outcome. Ethan made grilled cheese, 3 of them. Madison sat at his kitchen table and drank her coffee and watched him at the stove and didn't say anything and didn't need to. Sophie appeared and climbed into her chair and began a detailed account of everything she planned to look up about quartz when she got her computer time. And Madison asked questions at the right moments. And Ethan put plates on the table and sat down. And they ate lunch in his kitchen on Monday afternoon like it was something they'd done before, like it was something they were going to do again. After lunch, Sophie asked for her computer time and was granted 20 minutes, which she accepted under protest. And then immediately forgot her protest once the screen was in front of her. Ethan cleared the plates. Madison helped without being asked, moving around his kitchen, with the careful consideration of someone in a new space who is paying attention to the logic of it. He was at the sink when she came to stand beside him with the last 2 plates and said, "I've been thinking about what you said in the car." He kept washing. "Which part?" "The part where you said you wanted to be the person who could give me what I needed." She set the plates down. "For longer than this weekend." He turned off the water, turned to look at her. She was close. The kitchen was small. She was looking at him with the direct, unblinking focus she brought to things that mattered. The look that meant she had calculated everything she was willing to calculate, and had arrived at something she was going to say, without softening it. "How long?" she said. He looked at her. Thought about the right answer, the safe answer. The answer that maintained plausible deniability and kept the circuit from overloading. Looked at her face and decided he was done with that particular kind of caution. "About 2 years," he said. "Give or take." She held his gaze. Something moved in her face. Something that started behind her eyes and worked its way forward. Something she'd been managing so long she'd forgotten. It was there until it wasn't managed anymore. 2 years, she said. "You were with Lucas for most of it," he said. "And then you weren't. And I didn't know how to." He stopped, adjusted. "I didn't want to be the thing that complicated your life when you were already dealing with something hard. So you just." "I stayed close," he said. "That's all I knew how to do. I stayed where I could help if you needed it, and I didn't make it about anything else." She stared at him. "That's the most infuriating and the most decent thing I've ever heard." "I know," he said, both at the same time. "Ethan." Her voice had gone quiet and direct and stripped of every layer that wasn't the real thing. "I knocked on your door because you were the only person I trusted to do this with me. Not because you were convenient or available. Because out of every person I know, you were the only one I trusted to stand next to me, without making it about yourself." She paused. "That's not nothing. That's not a small thing. I think I knew that. And I called it something safer. And I let myself believe it was just professional trust. Reliability." She exhaled. "It's not that." "No," he said, "it's not." She reached up and put her hand flat on his chest. Not a dramatic gesture, just placement. Just the fact of it. Like checking that something was solid before she put weight on it. His heart was doing something loud under her hand, and he was fairly certain she could feel it. "I don't want to lose you," she said. "That's my fear. That's the whole thing. If this goes wrong, I lose the one person who—" "It's not going to go wrong," he said. "You don't know that." "No," he said. "But I know. I've been careful with everything that matters to me for 30 years. And this is the first time in a long time that careful doesn't feel like the right word." He put his hand over hers on his chest. "I'm not asking you to stop being afraid. I'm asking you to let the fear be there and choose anyway." She looked at him. A long moment. The kitchen quiet around them. Sophie's voice, from down the hall, murmuring something to herself about minerals. "This is terrifying," Madison said. "Yeah," he said. "I'm choosing anyway," she said. And she kissed him. Not the way he'd kissed her at the lake house. That had been impulse. Momentum. A thing that happened faster than the decision to make it. This was a choice. Deliberate and certain and entirely, completely real. Her hand still flat against his chest. His hand over hers. The two of them standing in his small kitchen. In the afternoon light. With grilled cheese plates draining in the rack, and Sophie down the hall discovering something new about the world. When she pulled back, she looked at him with the open, unguarded face of a woman who has just done something brave and knows it and is not sorry. "Okay," she said. "Certain." "Okay," he said. From down the hall. "Dad, did you know quartz can grow in geodes? The outside looks totally plain, and then you break it open and it's completely different inside." Ethan looked at the doorway, looked at Madison. Something in his face must have done something, because she looked down and then away, and then pressed her lips together against a smile that won. "Anyway." "That's very true," Madison called back, toward the hallway. Her voice was steady and warm, and completely unlike the way she spoke in conference rooms. Sophie appeared in the doorway, holding her tablet up, showing a picture of a geode split in half, the rough gray exterior, the purple crystal interior. "Look," she said. "You can't tell from the outside at all." "No," Ethan agreed, "you can't." Sophie looked at both of them with the ancient, satisfied eyes of a 7-year-old who has been right about important things all weekend, and has the grace not to say so directly. "I'm going to need more rocks," she said. "For my collection. We should go back to the lake house." "We will," Madison said. She meant it. He could hear she meant it. Sophie accepted this and disappeared back down the hallway, with her tablet and her certainty and her complete, unperformable understanding of how things actually were. Ethan stood in his kitchen with Madison Hart, who was not his boss, and not a favor, and not a role he'd agreed to play for one weekend. She was the woman who had cataloged his tells and trusted him enough to ask him for something she'd never asked anyone, who had stood at a lakeside in the cold and held his hand when no one was watching, who had just told him she was terrified and chosen anyway. He was standing in the exact life he'd been managing, surviving, keeping orderly and functional and sufficient. The small house with the drawings on the refrigerator, and the one dad mug and the after-school schedule on the wall. The life he'd told himself was enough. It still was, but it was no longer only that. Madison picked up her coffee mug and leaned against the counter and looked at him with something easy and unguarded in her face. And, from down the hall, Sophie was ain's geological facts to herself with increasing delight. And the afternoon light was long and gold through the kitchen window. And Ethan Cole understood without planning it, without calculating it, without bracing for the load that the circuit had not broken. It had just found its right capacity, and neither of them would ever have to pretend again.